You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Hey folks, happy Wednesday. Welcome to the show. This is Scotty Roberts. I'm your host for the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Also, you can come over and watch this broadcast in its simulcast video form on my YouTube channel. And while there, join the live chat room of other Intrep heads that's going on right now. That's at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, before we get rolling, I've got to make some mention that I haven't for a long time, but it's right here. If you're looking at the video, I mean, it's right here up in the corner of my screen. My friend John Penman, Penman hats. You see, I've got a few of them back here behind us, 4 of them that are Penman hats back there. My original was the Casablanca hanging on the wall, and that's the one that's kind of been around the world with me and back. It's a little, I wore a hole in the crown because I mistreated it in rocky caves and dust and dirt and sand dunes and Egypt and everywhere else. And so that one is not really retired, but there it hangs above my statue of Senenmut. But John Penman makes the best covers you would ever want to wear on your head. A cover, that's an old military term, I guess. We used to call your hat your cover. Cover, lid, hat, whatever you wear on the top of your head. So John Penman, I want you to take a look at his work. PenmanHats.com. Penman, spelled just like it sounds. PenMan.com. And go take a look at the hats that he does. He started out doing the Indiana Jones fedora, and he did probably one of the most exacting replicas, I guess you could say, of the Indiana Jones hat, maybe 15 years ago. And he has branched out, of course, into all different other kinds of hats from there. And he makes the best quality, the best bespoke, the best custom, and it's all hand done. And so you can go take a look at Penman hats. You should get one for yourself or for your loved one. And avail yourself of a good cover for your head. And not only fashionable, it looks good with jeans, looks good with, I got my hats here, you know that. I've tried them on before. This is one of Penman's hats right here. This is I believe this is the Everyman hat, his line of Everyman hats. This is the one where he has the hats pre-made to size, and then he bashes them all out to shape them. And the others, these are all custom hats, all the other ones that you see there. So this is one, it's not quite as expensive as the others, but good-looking hat nonetheless. And I used to take my hat on and off at the crown like that, and that's how I wore a hole in that one hanging on the wall. So you're supposed to take it by the brim. There you go. So Penman hats, there's my off the seat of my pants mention ad for Penman hats. Go to penman.com and see his hats. And those of you, of course, listening audibly, you can't see the hats that I have here hanging on my hat rack and the one on the wall. But go take a look at his. And if you go scroll down to the bottom of his website, you're going to see a whole gallery of John Ward and I in Egypt and other places modeling some of his hats. That one back there on the wall is my Casablanca, which is a hat that he makes. He named it Casablanca because it's a replica of the hat that Humphrey Bogart wore in the movie of the same name, Casablanca. And so go avail yourself of a good hat for your head. There's something I haven't mentioned in a while, so I took a little extra time to do that this morning. And I want to thank you for being here. Welcome to the program today. And we're going to continue our series on Native America. And believe it or not, we are drawing fairly close to the end of this series. I would say we probably got about anywhere from 6 to 10 episodes of this left, and we'll probably move on to some different material. But tonight, I want to talk about the Utes, U-T-E, and is the Ute tribe. And not Utes, Y-O-U-T-H, but the Utes. And we're going to start off with some quotes. Now, maybe the Utes, you aren't as familiar with them. Our own state, Utah, of course, was named roughly after the Utes. And I want to read you a couple of quotes here. This is by OURAY the Arrow, the chief of the Utes. He said, "The army conquered the Sioux. You can order them around, but we Utes have never disturbed you whites. So you must wait until we come to your way of doing things." And Nekagat, Jack they called him, of the White River Utes, said, "I told the officer that this was a very bad business, that it was very bad for the commissioner to give us such an order. I said it was very bad, that we ought to not fight because we were brothers, and the officer said that that didn't make any difference, that Americans would fight even though they were born of the same mother." Now, the Utes were Rocky Mountain Indians, and for a generation they had watched the invading white men move into their Colorado country like endless swarms of grasshoppers. They had seen the white men drive their old enemies, the Cheyenne, from the Colorado plains, and some Ute warriors had joined the rope thrower Kit Carson in the white man's war against the Navajo. Remember that way back at the beginning of this series we talked about Kit Carson and the Navajo. And in those times, the Utes believed the white men were their allies, and that they enjoyed visiting Denver to exchange buffalo hides for gaudy trade goods in the stores. But each year, these strange men from the east became more numerous, invading the Utes' mountains to dig for yellow and white metal. And in 1863, the governor of Colorado Territory, that's John Evans, if you remember John Evans, back in our talk about Evans and some of the orders that he put out as governor of the Colorado Territory, and other officials came to Conejos. I don't know how to pronounce it. Conejos. Conejos in the San Juan Mountains to meet with OURAY the Arrow and 9 chiefs of the Utes. Now, a treaty was signed there, and this gave the white men all the Colorado land east of the mountaintops, the Continental Divide. And it left the Utes all the land west of the Continental Divide. So in exchange for $10,000 worth of goods and $10,000 worth of provisions to be distributed annually for 10 years. And the Utes agreed to relinquish mineral rights to all parts of their territory. And they promised not to molest any citizen of the United States who might come into their mountains to dig. So this was the agreement they made. Now, 5 years later, the white men of Colorado decided they had let the Utes keep too much land. They had let them keep too much of their own land. And so through political pressures, they persuaded the Indian Bureau that the Utes were a constant nuisance, wandering everywhere, visiting towns, mining just like free people. They wandered everywhere, visited towns, they mined mining camps, they stole livestock from settlers. They said they wanted the Utes placed on a reservation with well-defined lines. But what they truly wanted was more Ute land. So now they've come into their territory. The Utes have given them no problem. They signed away mineral rights to their land, but they wandered too freely. Now they want to push them into a reservation because they want the rest of their land. So early in 1868, now last night when we were talking about Standing Bear, we were up to 1879. So we're going back a little bit. You see how we've gone up and we keep retracing this same couple of decades of when the big pushes into the reservations took place. So early in 1868, with a great deal of fanfare, the Indian Bureau invited OURAY, Nekagat, that's Jack, not Captain Jack, not the same character, but Jack, they called him, Nekagat, and 8 other chiefs to Washington, D.C. Now, the rope thrower Kit Carson accompanied them as a trusted friend and an advisor. And in Washington, they were quartered in a fine hotel. They were served excellent meals, and they were given an abundance of tobacco, candy, and medals that they could pin on their clothing. And when the time came for treaty making, the officials insisted that one of the visiting chiefs must accept responsibility for all 7 bands represented. and this was OURAY the Arrow. He was the unanimous choice for chief of all the Utes. He was half Apache, half Uncompahgre Ute, I don't know if I pronounced that right, Uncompahgre Ute. He was a handsome, round-faced, sharp-eyed Indian who could speak English and Spanish as fluently as 2 Indian tongues he knew. And so he was multilingual. And when the land-hungry politicians tried to put him on the defensive, OURAY was sophisticated enough to present the Utes' case to newspaper reporters. And he said this, he said, "The agreement an Indian makes to a United States treaty is like the agreement a buffalo makes with his hunters when pierced with arrows. All he can do is agree to lie down and give in." Now that was something that OURAY the Arrow said, and that was published in, let me find where you can look up some of these quotes. You can look up these people. This was in Marshall Sprague's book, Massacre, The Tragedy at White River. And that was published in 1957. Now, that might be a little foreboding of what's to come here. So, the officials could not fool OURAY with their bright-tinted maps and unctuous phraseology about border lines. Instead of accepting a small corner of western Colorado, he'd held out for 16 million acres of the western slope forests and the meadows, and considerably less territory than his people had claimed before, but considerably more than the Colorado politicians wanted them to have. So 2 agencies were to be established, one at Los Pinos for the Uncompahgre, and the other southern bands, one on White River for the northern bands. And OURAY also demanded inclusion of certain protective clauses in the new treaty, words meant to keep miners and settlers off the Ute reservation. And according to the treaty, no unauthorized white man would ever be permitted to pass over, settle upon, or reside in the territory that was going to be assigned to the Utes by this treaty. And in spite of this restriction, the miners continued to trespass. And among them was Frederick W. Pitkin, a New England Yankee who ventured into the San Juan Mountains and made a quick fortune mining silver. And in 1872, Pitkin became a leading advocate among the owners of wealthy mining interests who wanted this to add the San Juan area, that's 1/4 of the Ute reservation, to the Colorado Territory. So bowing to the miners' wishes, the Indian Bureau sent out a special commission again. Notice this is all going on concurrently with all these other special commissions that you're seeing going out to other tribes in the same decade. And so bowing to their wishes, the Indian Bureau sent out a special commission headed by Felix Bruno to negotiate with the Utes for cessation of this land. Now, at Los Pinos Agency in September of 1873, Bruno's commission met OURAY and the representatives of the 7 Ute nations. Now, Bruno told the chiefs, it's Bruno, B-R-U-N-O-T is the way it's spelled. T is silent. It could be Brunot. I choose to pronounce it Bruno. He told the chiefs that the Great Father had asked him to come and talk to them about giving up some of their reservation land. And he assured them that he didn't want the land for himself and had not come to tell them what to do, but to hear what they had to say about the matter. This is the tack he took. And he said, "It's much better sometimes to do what does not please us just now," this is what Bruno said, "if we think it will be best for our children later." And so the chiefs wanted to know how it would benefit their children if they gave up their land. Bruno explained that the government would set aside a large sum of money for the Utes, and each year the tribe would be paid interest from it for the ceded land. "I do not like the interest part of the agreement," OURAY declared. "I would rather have the money in the bank. You give me the whole thing now, I'll put it in the bank." He then complained because the government had not kept its treaty promise to remove the white men who were found trespassing on the Ute reservation. That's the prior agreement from, I think it was 1868. So Bruno replied frankly that if the government tried to drive the miners out, that this would bring on a war. So Bruno is justifying the breaking of the treaty by saying, well, if we tried to keep the white men out of your land, well, we'd start a war, and the Utes would lose their land without receiving any pay for it. So, in other words, what Bruno is actually admitting here is that we write these treaties, but they're really meaningless because we would take your land anyway. Isn't this what we've seen over and over again already up till now? So you can see, folks, how the story of Native America and the United States conquering of the American West, all it was just land grab after land grab. That's what it was all about. And that's what all the death was about, all the bloodshed, all the warring, all the broken treaties, reservations. This was all about taking their land because we had the power to do it. And so the best thing that can be done, Bruno said, is if you can spare these mountains, is to sell them and have something coming in every year. So the miners care very little about our government and do not obey the laws, OURAY agreed. They say they don't care about the government, and it's a long way off in the States, and they say the man who comes to make the treaty will go off to the States, and it'll all be as they want it. Now, the States to the Indians out here in the Rocky Mountains, that was out on the East Coast. That was east of the Mississippi. The States was a foreign place to the Colorado Rockies. Suppose you sell the mountains, Bruno continued, and if there's no gold in them, then it would be a benefit to you. The Utes get the pay for the mountains, and the Americans would stay away because there's no gold. But suppose there are mines there. It will not stop the trouble. We would not keep the people away, meaning gold is more important than obeying the law, is what he's telling them. Can you see that? And so why can't you stop them? OURAY demanded. Is not the government strong enough to keep its own agreements with us? There is a very telling question, folks. Is not the government of the United States, who can move whole peoples off of their land by force and wage war, are they not strong enough to keep their own people off of our land? Are they not strong enough to keep their own agreements? I would like to stop them, Bruno said, but OURAY knows it's a hard thing to do. He's talking about the miners that would come in. Now, OURAY said he was willing to sell the mountains, but not all the fine hunting land around them. The whites can go and take the gold and come out again. We don't want them to build houses there. Now, Bruno replied that he didn't believe this could be done. There was no way to force the miners to leave Ute territory once they had come and dug their mines there. I'll ask the Great Father, the President of the United States, to drive the miners away, he promised, but 1,000 other men will tell him to let them alone. Perhaps he will do as I say, perhaps not. Now, this is Bruno. This is the reasoning they're using with the Indians. Now, what he just said there was part of the Secretary of the Interior's report of 1873. And so after 7 days of discussions, the chiefs agreed to accept the government's offer of $25,000 a year for the 4 million acres of treasure. Now, even by archaic standards, the standards of 150 years ago, that's not very much money for what can be pulled out of those mountains. And so as a bonus, OURAY was to receive a salary of $1,000 a year for 10 years, so $10,000 more dollars, or so long as he shall remain head chief of the Utes and at peace with the United States. Thus did OURAY become part of the establishment, motivated to preserve the status quo. So they're buying him off, is what they're trying to do. So living in a paradise of magnificent meadows, forests abundant with wild game, berries, nuts, and the Utes were self-supporting and could have existed entirely without the provisions doled out to them by their agents at Los Pinos and White River. And in 1875, Agent F.F. Bond at Los Pinos replied to a request for a census of his Utes. He said, "A count is quite impossible. You might as well try to count a swarm of bees when on the wing. They travel all over the country like the deer which they hunt." And that was Agent E.H. Danforth at White River estimated that about 900 Utes used his agency as a headquarters, but he admitted that he had no luck in inducing them to settle down in the valley around the agency. The United States wants them to settle so they can count them and keep track of them all. So at both places, the Utes humored their agents by keeping small beef herds and planting a few rows of corn, potatoes, and turnips, but there was no real need for any of these pursuits on the part of the Utes. And so what are they doing? They're hey, who's going to go down this year and take care of the small herd we have at the agency and plant some corn so they can see that we're doing stuff? That's basically what it became. It was symbolic. And so the beginning of the end of freedom upon their own reservation came in the spring of 1878, when a new agent reported for duty at White River. The agent's name was Nathan C. Meeker. He was a former poet, a novelist, a newspaper correspondent, and an organizer of cooperative agrarian colonies. So most of Meeker's ventures had failed, and although he sought the agency position because he needed the money, he was possessed of a missionary fervor and sincerely believed that it was his duty as a member of a superior race to elevate and enlighten the Utes. As he phrased it, he was determined to bring them out of savagery, through the pastoral stage to the barbaric, and finally to the, quote, enlightened scientific and religious stage. So Meeker was confident that he could accomplish all this in 5, 10, or maybe 20 years. So, nothing really solid there as far as his goals. But the U.S. Secretary of the Interior recorded all this in the report of 1879. And so, in his humorless and overbearing way, Meeker set out systematically to destroy everything the Utes cherished, to make them over into his own image, as he believed he had been made in God's image. Now, didn't we see a lot of this when we were on a totally different topic several months back, talking about Gnostic Christianity and Gnostic mysticism? The now Orthodox literalist church wanted to form followers and believers in their own image to control them and do what they said they were supposed to do. This is the same type of thing you see here going on with Meeker and the Utes. And right now we've got to stop for the end of this first segment, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. So if you're listening on Odyssey Radio, stay tuned for these ads. If you're watching in the video, watch a little music, and we'll be back in a few minutes. So stand by.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAlanRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, AlanRoberts.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome back to the show for the second segment of tonight's program, the Intrepid radio program, right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Or come on over to my YouTube channel, watch the video simulcast, join the live chat room of other Intrepids. It's the best part of the video stream that's going on. And that's over at my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. Now, we're talking about the Utes. We're talking about how they were willing to give up mineral rights in the Rocky Mountains, but the whites, they wanted control over the whites coming into their territory without permission. Well, this kept going on. We see the agent had come to rewrite, and they took him to Washington. They did all that stuff, wine him, dine him. And OURAY, the arrow, they tried to bribe him, buy him into the establishment with $1,000 a year salary for 10 years, as well as giving $25,000 to the Utes, spread out over years through money and provisions. And now there's this new agent, Meeker, who is at the White River agency. I don't know why I blanked on the word agency, but he's pretty humorless. He's overbearing. He sees himself as the savior to a savage people, to bring them up out of savagery and barbarism and finally to the enlightened scientific and religious stage of the whites. So he was very humorless. He was overbearing. Meeker set out to systematically destroy everything that the Utes cherished, to make them over into his own image, which he believed was God's image. And so his first unpopular action was to move the agency 15 miles down White River, where there was fine pasture land suitable for plowing. Here, Meeker planned to build a cooperative agrarian colony for the Ute Indians. Now remember, he's failed at all other attempts to do things like this before, but now he's an Indian agent. And so he's trying to build this agrarian colony where they can plant food. But he overlooked the fact that the Utes had not long been used to the area as a hunting ground and for pasturing their horses. So the site he chose to build the agency buildings was on a traditional racing strip where the Utes enjoyed their favorite sport of betting on pony races. And so Meeker found Quinquet, or Douglas, he was renamed, to be the most amiable of the chiefs at White River. He was a Yampa Ute, about 60 years old. His hair was still dark, his pendant mustaches turning white. Douglas owned more than 100 ponies, which made him rich by Ute standards. And he had lost most of his following among the younger men to Nakagat, or Jack. Now, like OURAY, the arrow, Jack was a half-blooded Apache. As a boy, he had learned to speak a few words of English while living in a Mormon family, and he'd served out as a scout for General Crook, Three Fingers Crook, during the Sioux Wars. And when he first met Meeker, Jack was wearing a scout uniform, the frontier buckskins, army boots, and a wide-brimmed hat. He always wore the silver medal that was given to him by the Great Father when he went to Washington with OURAY in 1868, and this would have been, of course, Johnson who gave him that medal. And Jack and his people were away on a buffalo hunt during the period that Meeker moved the agency. And when they came back to the original site, they found everything's gone. Where'd everybody go? They made camp there, and after a few days, Meeker came up to order Jack to move to the new site. I told Meeker that the site of the old agency had been settled by treaty, Jack said afterward, and that I knew of no law or treaty that made mention of the new site. Then the agent told me that we had better all move down below, and that if we did not, we should be obliged to, for that they had the soldiers. Now, that was the quote by Jack. And Meeker tried to placate Jack by promising to obtain milk cows for his band. But Jack replied that Utes had no need for either cows or milk. Well, thanks, but no thanks. It's no great inducement. Now, Colorado was the third. Colorado, it's like Colorado without the dough at the end. Colorado was the third chief of importance, a Muche Ute in his 60s. And for a few years after the Treaty of 1868, Colorado and his people lived in a small temporary reservation adjoining Denver. And when it pleased them, they roamed freely through the town. They dined in the restaurants. They attended the theaters, clowning for white citizens. And in 1875, the reservation was closed up, and Colorado took his muaches. I don't know if that's muchan. It's Muaches, the muaches, up to the White River to join Jack's people after they closed up the Denver reservation. And so they missed the excitement of Denver, but they enjoyed the fine hunting in the White River country. Now, the muaches were not interested in Meeker's agrarian society, and they visited the agency only when they wanted a few sacks of flour or some coffee and sugar. I'd go a long way for a good cup of coffee. And so Canala, or Johnson, was the chief medicine man. He was a brother-in-law to OURAY, the arrow, and the operator of a pony racing track where Meeker wanted to build the new agency houses. Now, mind you, this is all Native American stuff. This isn't just the white influence. They raced their ponies all the time. They had their own businesses. They had their own ways of doing things. And so he was a medicine man, and he also owned the races, the racing ground. And Johnson liked to wear a plugged hat, which he'd obtained in Denver. And for some reason, Meeker chose Johnson as the most likely man to help him lead the Utes out of savagery. Maybe it's because he saw he was an entrepreneur and set up his races and things like that, and also had some sway over the people because he was a medicine man. So, also to assist him in his great crusade, Meeker brought his wife, Arvilla, and his daughter, Josie, to the agency. He employed 7 white workmen, including a surveyor, to lay out an irrigation canal, a lumberman, a bridge builder, a carpenter, and a mason. And these men were expected to teach the Utes their trades while they were building the new agrarian paradise on the White River. 15 miles from where the treaty said that they were supposed to have their agency. So it was Meeker's fancy to have the Utes address him as Father Meeker. You call me Father Meeker. And in their savage state, he looked upon them as children. But most of them called him Nick, much to his displeasure. So imagine, he's so, you will call me Father Meeker because I'm bringing to you the image of God that God has put on me, and I'm going to form you in my image. And you know the kind of people I'm talking about. They will talk down. It's like watching some young person go into a nursing home and talk to an older person who's been around the block many times before them and say, would we like something to eat today? Because they see them as children, as lesser than something, and the old person's probably going, shut up. So this is the way they saw him. But they called him Nick instead of Father Meeker. And by the spring of 1879, now this is the same year that Standing Bear, that we talked about last night, had his trial for his civil rights. In 1879, Beaker had a few agency buildings under construction, and 40 acres of land were plowed. And most of the work was done by his white employees who were paid money for their efforts. Meeker couldn't understand why the Utes also expected money for building their very own cooperative agrarian community. Why do you want money for doing the work? This is for you. I'm giving you advanced civilization. Why wouldn't you just appreciate it and do the work? But in order to get his irrigation ditches dug, he agreed to pay more money to 30 Utes. Now, they were willing workers until Meeker's funds were exhausted. And then they went away to hunt or to attend the pony races. And their needs are so few that they do not wish to adopt civilized habits, Meeker complained to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. What we call conveniences and comforts are not sufficiently valued by them to cause them to undertake to obtain them by their own efforts. The great majority look upon the white man's ways with indifference and contempt. Now, he proposed a course of action to correct this barbaric condition. First, take away the Utes' hundreds of ponies so that they could not roam and hunt. Replace the ponies with a few draft horses for plowing and hauling. And then as soon as the Utes were thus forced to abandon the hunt and remain near the agency, he would issue no more rations to those who would not work. I shall cut every Indian down to bare starvation point, he wrote to Colorado's Senator Henry M. Tiller, if he will not work. Now, this is Meeker's view of how to get these guys to do what he wants them to do, and this was part of the U.S. Secretary report, by the way, of 1879. It was submitted by Paul Wellman, A Death on Horseback. So you can take a look at that stuff if you'd like to. So Meeker, arrogant and cocky, and I'll just take away all their ponies. I'll take away what they own, as well as their land. So Meeker's inveterate itch for writing down his ideas and observations, and then sending them off to be put into print, eventually brought him to a complete breaking point with the Utes. And during the spring of 1879, he wrote an imaginary dialogue with one of the Ute women, attempting to show how the Indians could not comprehend the joys of work or the value of material goods. During the course of his maybe the Utes were onto something. Maybe the Native Americans were onto something. Why work so hard planting the food when it's all there? All you have to go do is get it. It was work to go on a buffalo hunt. It was work to go hunting. It was work, but life was meant to be enjoyed. And they lived just fine before Meeker tried to establish his agrarian colony. So during the course of this fictional dialogue that Meeker wrote, Meeker declared that the reservation land belonged to the government and was only assigned to the Utes for their use. If you don't use it and won't work it, he warned, white men a way off will come in and by you'll have absolutely nothing. And this is what he wrote in his own fictional dialogue. Now, this little composition was first published in the Greeley Tribune in Colorado, where it was seen by William B. Vickers, a Denver editor-politician who despised the Indians, especially Utes. Remember, they had their little reservation right near Denver, and they freely roamed Denver. And Vickers at that time was serving as secretary to Frederick Pitkin, the wealthy miner who in 1873 had been the leader in separating the San Juan Mountains from the Ute ownership. And Pitkin had used his power to become the governor of Colorado when it became a state in 1876. And after the end of the Sioux Wars in 1877, Pitkin and Vickers began drubbing up a propaganda campaign to have all the Utes exiled to Indian Territory in Oklahoma. Let's move them all out. We want them all out of Colorado, thus leaving an immense amount of valuable land free for the taking. Vickers seized upon Nathan Meeker's newspaper essay as a fine argument for removing the Utes from Colorado, and he wrote an article about it for the Denver Tribune, and it said in part this. This is Vickers writing. The Utes are actual, practical communists, and the government should be ashamed to foster and encourage them in their idleness and wanton waste of property. Living off the bounty of paternal but idyllic Indian Bureau, they actually become too lazy to draw their rations in the regular way, but insist on taking what they want whenever they find it. Removed to Indian Territory, the Utes could be fed and clothed for about one half what it now costs the government. Honorable N.C. Meeker, the well-known superintendent of the White River Agency, was formerly a fast friend and ardent admirer of the Indians. Never, by the way, was he an ardent admirer or a fast friend. Remember, Meeker went there to bestow upon them the image of God. He went to the agency in firm belief that he could manage the Indians successfully by kind treatment, patient precept, and good example. Call me Father Meeker. But utter failure marked his efforts, and at last he reluctantly accepted the truth of the border truism that the only truly good Indians, finish the line for me, are, right, dead Indians. And so this was Vickers' take on things. So Vickers wrote considerably more, and his article was reprinted across Colorado under the title, "The Utes Must Go." That was the title of his article. And by late summer of 1879, most of the white orators who abounded in frontier Colorado were uttering the applause-producing cry of, "The Utes must go," whenever they were called upon to speak in public places. Now, in various ways, the Utes learned that Nick Meeker had betrayed them in print. They were especially angry because their agent had said the reservation land did not belong to them, but to the government. And they delivered a sort of official protest to him through the agency interpreter. Meeker reiterated his statement and added that he had the right to plow any of the reservation he chose because it was government land and he was the agent of the government. Meanwhile, William Vickers was accelerating his Utes Must Go campaign by manufacturing stories of Indian crimes and outrages. He even blamed the numerous forest fires of that unprecedented drought year on the Utes. And on July 5th, Vickers prepared a telegram to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs for Governor Pitkin's signature. It said this: "Reports reach me daily that a band of White River Utes are off their reservation destroying forests. They have already burned millions of dollars of timber and are, see how they value everything. Millions of dollars of timber are being burned. There's a dollar figure on that because somebody's going to profit from the timber on the land that they stole from the Utes. They've already burned millions of dollars of timber and are intimidating settlers and miners. I'm satisfied there is an organized effort on the part of the Indians to destroy the timber of Colorado. These savages should be removed to Indian territory where they can no longer destroy the finest forests in this state." And that was part of the 1879 report to the Secretary of the Interior. And the commissioner replied with a promise to the governor to take action, and then sent a warning to Meeker to keep his Utes on the reservation. And when Meeker sent for the chiefs, he discovered that they were holding an indignation meeting. They had already heard about the governor's false charges and his threats to send them to Indian territory. And a white friend named Peck, who operated a supply store on the Bear River north of the reservation, had read the story in a Denver newspaper and told it to Nickagut, to Jack. Now, according to the news report, the Utes had set fires along Bear River and burned down a house belonging to James B. Thompson, a former Ute agent. Now, Jack was much disturbed by this account, and Peck agreed to go with him to Denver to see Governor Pitkin to tell him that there is absolutely no truth to this. We did not set forest fires. So they chose a route which would take them by the Thompson house. "We passed by there," Jack said afterward. "We saw Thompson's house standing. It wasn't burned at all." So after a great deal of difficulty, Jack secured admittance to Governor Pitkin's office. "The governor asked me how things were in my country on White River," Jack said, saying that the papers were saying a great deal about us. I told him I thought so myself, and for that reason I had come to Denver. I said I did not understand why this business was in such a state. The governor then said he then said, here's a letter from your Indian agent. This is what the government told him. The governor told him. Here's a letter from your Indian agent, Meeker. He had written that letter, but I'm not being able to write. Hold on. I'm confusing the words because it's quotes of how he was speaking. I said I did not understand why this business was in such a state. He then said, this is Jack talking. He then said, here is a letter from your Indian agent. I told him that, as an Indian agent Meeker could write, he had written that letter, but I, not being able to write, had come to see him in person and answer it. That much we talked, and then I told him I did not wish him to believe what was written in that letter. He asked me if it was true that Thompson's house was burned. I told him that I had not seen the house, or that I had seen the house, and that it was not burned. I then talked to the governor about the Indian agent, and told him it would be well for him to write to Washington and recommend that some other agent be put in his place. And he promised to write Washington, D.C. the next day. Now, this was Jack, and this is part, of course, again, of the U.S. Congress, the 46th session, the House Executive Document. Now, Pitkin, of course, the governor of Colorado Territory, he had no intention of recommending a replacement for Meeker. From the governor's point of view, everything was moving in the right direction. The Utes must go. All he had to do was wait for a showdown between Meeker and the Utes, and then perhaps the Utes would go. So about this same time, Meeker was preparing his monthly report for the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, and he wrote that he was planning to establish a police force among the Utes. They're in a bad humor, he added, yet only a few days later he initiated actions which he surely must have known would make the Utes even more belligerent. And although there is no direct evidence that Meeker sympathized with Governor Pitkin's Utes Must Go program, almost every step Meeker took seemed designed to arouse the Indians to revolt. They're poking them with a stick. Now, Meeker may not have wanted the Utes to go, but he certainly wanted their ponies banished. So early in December, he ordered one of his white workmen, Shadrach Price, to begin plowing a section of grassland on which the Utes pastured their ponies. And some of the Utes protested immediately, asking Meeker why he didn't plow somewhere else. They needed that grassland for their ponies. So west of the pasture was a section of sageland, which Quinquet or Douglas offered to clear for plowing. But Meeker stubbornly insisted upon plowing up the grass. No, we can't plow where the sagebrush is. We got to plow where the grass is, and this would leave no grazing land for their horses. So the Utes' next move was to send out a few young men with rifles. They approached the plowman and ordered him to stop. Shadrach Price obeyed, but when he reported the threat to Meeker, the agent sent him back to finish his work. This time the Utes fired warning shots above Price's head. The plowman hurriedly unhitched his horses and left the pasture. So Meeker was furious. You see what they're doing? They're provoking the Utes. He composed an indignant letter to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. "This is a bad lot of Indians," he wrote. "They have had free rations so long and have been flattered and petted so much that they think themselves lords of all. Well, isn't this their land? Isn't this the place where they graze their ponies?" So you can see the logic, the reasoning, the justification that's being used here. So that afternoon, the medicine man, Kanala Johnson, came to the agency office to seek Meeker. He told Meeker that the land being plowed had been assigned to him for pasturing his ponies. Now that the plowing was stopped, he did not want it started up again. Meeker interrupted Johnson's impassioned speech. "The trouble is this, Johnson. You have too many ponies. You had better kill some of them." So this is Meeker's response to, "Hey, you're plowing on my grazing land for my horses." And for a moment, Johnson stared at Meeker in disbelief. It's kind of like, "What did you just say?" And so suddenly he moved toward the agent, caught him by the shoulders, pushed him out on the porch, and shoved him against the hitching rail. Without saying a word, Johnson then stalked away. Can you imagine? I probably would have punched him in the face. But, so here's Meeker telling him that you have too many ponies. That's what the trouble is. Not me plowing up your pony's grazing land that we gave to you, that we signed a treaty on. But the problem is you have too many ponies. You should kill some of them. And so Johnson pushed him out the door and up against the rail and then walked away. Now, Johnson afterward related his version of the incident. I told the agent that it was not right that he should order men to plow my land. The agent told me I was always a troublesome man, and that it was likely I might come to the calaboose. I told him that I did not know why I should go to prison. I told the agent that it would be better for another agent to come who was a good man and was not talking such things. I then took the agent by the shoulder and told him it was better that he should go. Without doing anything else to him, striking him or anything else, I just took him by the shoulder. I was not mad at him. Then I went to my house. Now that's Johnson's version of what we just told you about. And this was part of the 46th Congress, second session, executive documents. Now, before Meeker took further action, he summoned Nakagat, or Jack, to his office for a talk. Jack later recalled the meeting. Jack said this: I told Meeker that it was nothing, that it was a small matter, and that he'd better let it drop. Meeker said it didn't make any difference, that he would mind it and complain about it. I still told him that it would be a very bad business to make such a fuss about nothing. Meeker said he didn't like to have a young man take hold of him by the shoulder like that, and that he was an old man and had no strength to retaliate, and he didn't want to have a young man take hold of him in that way. He said that he was an old man and Johnson had mistreated him, and that he would not say any more to him, that he was going to ask the commissioner for soldiers, and that he would drive the Utes from their lands because of that incident. I answered that the land did not belong to the Utes, and that was the reason why the government had the agencies there, because it was the Utes' land. I answered that the land did belong to the Utes. Pardon my stating that wrong. And that the reason why the government had the agencies there, because it was the Utes' land. And I told him again that the trouble between him and Johnson taking him by the shoulder, if he either pushed him out the door and up against the horse rail, or if he took him by the shoulder and said, and walked off, no matter how that had come off, it was a small matter, and to drop it and stop making so much fuss. And for another day and night, Meeker brooded over his deteriorating relations with the Utes, and he then finally made up his mind that he must teach them a lesson. He dispatched 2 telegrams, one to Governor Pitkin asking for military protection, and another to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs. And we'll end with this tonight, because we're at the end of our time. This is the telegram that Meeker sent to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs and to Governor Pitkin. I have been assaulted by a leading chief, Johnson, forced out of my own house and injured badly. It is now revealed that Johnson originated all the trouble. His son shot at the plowman, and the opposition to plowing is wide. Plowing stops, life of itself, family and employees not safe, want protection immediately, have asked Governor Pitkin to confer with General Pope. Now, that's the way Meeker painted the events. He's asking for soldiers, and we all know what's coming next. So you all sit tight. Thank you for being here tonight. And I'm going to take a 23-hour break right now. We'll be back tomorrow, same time. See you then.